Teresa now.
Hey,
It's now, which means you should have full control over how to do it.
The Discord is kind of cutting out. Oh wait, I think we're live. Here, let me pull it up.
Are
Oh,
we-
yep, we're up. I'll tag it. I'll send it in my server. I'll tag it in.
Teresa now. Hello.
Hello.
hey,
I don't think our voices are coming through. I think only yours is. You should have full control.
No, your
Oh.
voices are coming through.
Okay.
It should be working. The quality's pretty bad on the image, but that's fine.
Alright, let me go
So-
tweet out the new stream.
Oh. There we go, after like 15 minutes of trying to fix that. Apparently all we needed to do was start a new stream.
F.
I'll have to figure out how to make the quality of like the visual better, because it's like 480p right now. Maybe I can do that in settings. I'll fix that later. Oh.
Alright, let's wait for some people to come in. And
I'll show it on Twitter.
yep, same.
Tweet.
Are we live now?
Yeah,
Yes.
we've been streaming for 106 seconds now, I think.
Yep. So yeah, we're just gonna be waiting. I am Colton.
I'm Isaac.
And Volnost?
I'm
Yo, who?
Hoppean.
Emo had a little glitch.
Yeah, apparently. Should I say it again?
I think.
No. You're good. I think we're about where we were. In terms of watchers, and on the other stream. So let's get started. So the introduction to this book starts off with Walter Block basically bloviating about how great this book is, and it is a very good book. He says that this book has converted more people to laissez-faire free market economics than any other book combined, which I can understand. It's written for a lay audience, and it goes over basically timeless issues. In the preface to the book, Henry has after consistencies that he would not want to tie to this book, because that would make it at some point. So what he does instead, he just presents the argument and just deconstructs the arguments made for various policies, and he shows how the lesson that is referenced in the title can be applied to each and every one of these economic fallacies. You guys have anything to add to that?
I think that does a pretty good job kind of summing up
Yeah.
what the purpose of the book is. There's no doubt that this book has done a lot to convert many people to the laissez-faire side of things. I've heard it recommended to me and to others countless times, so it's going to be very good to be able to go over this legendary work.
Yeah.
Yep.
I agree. This was one of my first economics books that really red pilled me on the economy, how things.
Yeah. I see we got a couple more watchers now, and so this would also be a good time to say why we are covering this book. So the book club, the idea behind it is to go over various economics and libertarian books and read them and talk about them, summarize them, add to the contents where we think it's applicable, based on our own knowledge or other things we have read in the past. And so this will also hopefully get people to actually read these books, or at least give a video at the end of it to help people understand what these books are talking about. It'll also let the audience read the books along with us. We're going to be reading about 50 pages a week, and so that they can read with us and basically have a discussion. So we'll be reading the chat as well while we go over this.
Yeah, this is going to be a good way to be able to engage people in our audience to kind of go along with them and work with them in going through these various books that cover different topics important to liberty and economics.
Yeah.
Agreed. As well as helping our own selves, have a better understanding of things we don't particularly get.
Right, for sure. Be able to constantly learn more, because nobody really knows everything, and anybody who says they do is just lying to themselves. So we can always learn more and more.
For sure.
Okay. So I think this would be a good time to tell you what the lesson is. One second, let me open. Look at the short, but also a specific group, on a specific group, on all groups in society. And so,
Right.
Yep, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, a lot of the economic policies that have been implemented, probably most notably since the 1960s, and have created a lot of the proliferation of many victim groups, and that are constant against.
Yeah.
And seeing each other as enemies rather than a nation of people working.
Yep. Begins the first chapter talking about the special pleading of selfish interest. This can be the label. Is various government officials, when they talk about public works and things like that we'll actually get into this in this episode.
Yeah, that was definitely a very interesting chapter for me, or at least a couple of them when they talked about public works projects. I'm excited to get in. To those.
Yep. Yeah. Has of how man typically thinks of immediate effects or special, and not the long run effects on all groups, and that's probably because man is living in the moment and he's part of that special group. Like, if you're you're probably going to be interested in a policy that has an immediate effect and has an effect on.
Right.
Right.
Going to be very focused on your very limited sphere of and not thinking in terms of the other sectors of the economy that are inevitably affected.
Oh, we have a comment saying that
Yeah,
all
the
Mike's
mic's
cutting out a
cutting
lot.
I don't know if that's my computer or because my internet seems to be working pretty well, but for some reason, I think Discord might be cutting out. So
Yep, I see the stream overlay is wonking though. Do you know whose mics are cutting out? Is it everyone's or is it
I
just a
think-
particular person?
I think it just might be on my end. Discord is cutting out. So I turned my fan on, just to make sure like my computer doesn't overheat. So it should work better from now on. But I don't know. Can you guys hear the fan at all?
No, but
No.
you're all cutting out a little bit.
All right. I'll move my mic a little bit more away from it just to make it better. It should be better now.
It says both. So both the people that are talking. Okay, it seems good now. When did it start cutting out? Because we don't want it to necessarily cut out the discussion.
Yeah, it could just be the internet.
Yeah.
I think it started cutting out, like, because it was cutting out on my end a bit too. So I think it might have just, it was like a little bit ago when we first started talking about it.
Okay.
I just checked the stream. Isaac's mic is fine. Josiah is fine, but he's a little bit quiet. Colton is the one who was cutting out the most.
Ah, damn.
But you're not cutting out on Discord, which is weird.
Yeah, so I think it's more on my end.
Yeah, and I was doing most of the talking, at least half of the talking,
Yeah.
because I have the notes and am walking the group through the chapters. Huh. Okay. Did we miss? Was it cutting out so bad we missed topics, or was it like cutting like half of a word in a sentence? It would be the question because I don't know if we should go back. Do, do, do.
So much fun having all these technical
I guess that's
difficulties.
what happens when we try streaming for the first time.
on the
next
first
time-
run, but I mean, what's to be expected?
Yeah. Hopefully next time it works better though.
Honestly,
Yeah.
fat.
I have pretty good internet if you guys want.
Oh right, but you need a laptop, don't you?
Why?
To run OBS.
I have a computer.
That works.
Maybe next time if it's working fine, which
Yeah.
people are saying it is.
Yeah.
Okay,
That would work.
just Mac.
Moving on, right along then.
So, economists, bad economists, when good economists talk about the long run, typically say something along the effect of, "In the long run, we are all dead," which is really interesting because we still hear that today. It's not like this crip has gone away.
Yeah, that's something very telling. I think that you back them into a corner, and then all they can say is, "Well, that's just the way it is in the long run, anyways. So may as well just accept it and implement this awful policy anyway."
Yep.
That's a very nihilistic way to view, you know, destructive behavior.
Also,
Yeah,
just kind
and
of screwing
it-
your children over.
Yeah, it also ignores what the long run is, because the long run effects seen in a month or a few months, maybe even a few years. So the bad or
Yes, yeah.
Yep. We can see that uh, taking time to and into being economic devastation. It's already been devastated, and now it's going to be like 9/11. They have said uh, they're not going to admit they were in the wrong, and we're just going to have to deal with it. And then people are going to be clamoring for more government to help them
Hmm.
when it shouldn't have been done in the first place.
Black pilled again.
Yeah. No, actually, I agree with that. I can talk about firsthand because my mom and my uncle, they work together. They have a company. Um, my uncle owns most of the company, but my mom has a few shares. And the company is basically just like the two of them and one more employee. And then like whenever they need extra help, they just like hire like third party, and then just for like individual like amount of work. And they work with events, so they basically like rent audio and visual equipment, so like speakers, lights, all that stuff. And then they also go and like build the events. They put together the events. They hire personnel to like man the equipment and take care of everything. Uh, all of it. They can take care of everything. And then like they were like basically the first ones to get like wrecked by this, because all the events were banned, and like you can't have gatherings with more than like X people, so there's no way people are gonna like have an event. And since they're like such a small company, like just two people, one employee, there's no way that they can like survive for a really long time without like any work at all, especially when they have like a warehouse where all the equipment is stored, and they have to like keep it, like they have to maintain it, and like the work stops but the bills don't, you know. So there's no way like these kinds of businesses can survive.
Yep.
Yeah, there were a bunch of businesses that had to shut down permanently in my town.
Yeah. Although this is somewhat of a tangent.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like, I mean, they were able to survive so far because they own most of the equipment that, I mean, they own all the equipment that they rent, so they don't have to pay that much in terms of bills. But what's really like wrecking everyone is the taxes, because we're still going to have to pay taxes at the end of the year. We're still going to have to pay taxes every month or for everything that we buy. And now the our government, I live in Brazil, by the way. So now that our government, they gave us like a relief check, which was like 600 reais, which is about just over $100 by now. But I mean, different purchasing power, so it's decent. It's like half a minimum wage paycheck. But we're still gonna have to pay taxes at the end of the year. So if you have a car, if you have a house, at the end of the year, the beginning of next year, you're gonna have to pay like 2 or 3 times that in taxes. And that's rough for people who aren't working.
Yeah.
Man, how's that for long-term effects?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had to turn my taxes off at work just so I can have money to save.
And you know, it's not even that complex of a question. It's just instead of like, it's just such a counterintuitive measure. Like instead of fucking instead of like just giving everyone money, why don't you just like make it so people don't have to pay the taxes, because that would be like, that would save a lot more money, and it's not like that obscure of an option.
Ideally, but those politicians, they're not
Yeah.
they're exempt from the rule. They got to have their money. They can get paid. They can
Yeah.
go get haircuts and all and do whatever they want to do, but no, not the plebeians.
Yeah, and it also doesn't go to dependence. I think we should leave the current events to the No Tolerance podcast that we're going to be starting up here fairly soon.
All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Because I just didn't see how this was relating to the book. Sorry about that.
I think he was going for like showing how this is some of like the going to have long-term effects, because when you put a bunch of places out of business, there's no telling what that's going to do to the economy in the future. And it's not something that the politicians even care about when they put these policies in place.
Yeah. Okay. And the reason why so getting back to more just going through the book, Hazlitt actually in the first chapter talks about why bad economists and demagogues are so persuasive. And they're persuasive because they present half-truths and thus have an easier time persuading the public. And in order to show why these half-truths aren't the full truth, takes a long and deductive process that a lot of people won't be able to follow the logical reasoning behind. And then the bad economist or the demagogue can just have some quip like, oh, this is capitalist apologetics, or this is laissez-faire or classicism, that they can just wave off the criticism, and people who don't understand the logical reasoning behind it can just say, just like have that quip and be like, okay, I understand, even though it doesn't really address any of the argument.
Yeah, and that it's very true, because you just see a lot of economic debates just get boiled down to, well, you're just like licking capitalist boots or whatever, whenever you actually get down to the end of the argument, when you've pretty much backed them into the corner saying, well, this policy is going to have these bad implications, and then it just turns to useless, meaningless insults being thrown in order to try to discredit you by associating you with like whatever bad thing they can, whether that be capitalism or any other scare term, depending on what circles you run in.
Yeah, they'll
Yeah.
Like, even if you just bring up laissez-faire economics, some people tell you you're an individualist, when really individualism is its own thing. It's not necessarily what free market capitalism is about.
Yeah, I know one thing I used to see from somebody I followed on Twitter would be to like call people free market fundamentalists.
You're either free. It's either free or it isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's I don't know where I was going with that. It's just it is kind of true though. Like, if you go through Austrian economics, it is logically deductive and so on and so forth, and so it does require strict adherence to premises, a priori knowledge, and deductions.
Right.
And so it's not like you can just say, well, I feel like this today, so we're just going to believe this.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to.
You know what I see a lot though, which is like one of the biggest problems, is like whenever you're talking about economics and you're talking about a specific policy or a specific like model, and you're pointing out like all the negative consequences of it, or of that policy. So I don't know, say you're talking about like money printing or credit, and you're talking about how it's gonna increase inflation, and it's gonna lower the purchasing power, and it's gonna wreck people's savings. And then the rebuttal is always like, it would be worse otherwise.
Yeah,
And
you just get it's
it
such
just
a
doesn't make sense, because it's like you're explaining logically why something's going to happen because of that policy. It's not really like a valid argument to just say that it would be worse otherwise, especially when you're only speculating that it would be worse otherwise. You don't actually have like a logic to explain why.
right. You're just assuming that the policy is going to have all of the good effects, and the bad effects can be ignored because I don't know,
It
you
would
know.
be worse otherwise.
And this book actually goes into credit expansion and inflation, so that's actually a good thing that you brought it up, because I think next week we will be talking about that.
Oh, very
Yeah.
very cool.
Okay.
It's an
And,
important topic.
And just to reference Murray Rothbard in Anatomy of the State, on page 20 and 21, he makes the point to say it is evident that the state needs intellectuals, and the state, on the other hand, is willing to offer the intellectuals a secure and permanent berth in the state apparatus, and thus secure income and the panoply of prestige. For the intellectuals would be handsomely rewarded for the important function they perform for the state rulers, of which group they now become a part.
Yep.
So they definitely work. Demagogues and intellectuals definitely work hand in hand to secure power for the state
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
control the economy.
Paul Krugman.
Oh, yeah. Actually, we're going to be talking about Paul Krugman later on, because one of his quotes that he had the other day actually comes up in the book.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, I saw that. I lost my mind. I can't believe people actually say stuff like that. It's
Still,
complete nonsense.
like I can understand the person who said it and then got wrecked, in a reply, and then just like, okay, I guess that's wrong. But to have that still happen like 70 years later, that's just ridiculous. But I think that now that you brought that up, these bad economists are part of these intellectuals that the state has, and it doesn't necessarily matter that they have terrible arguments, as long as they are credentialed intellectuals that the state has. It doesn't matter how bad they are at it. The state can just say, hey, we have these people who say what we're doing is the correct thing to do, which we can actually see in current events like the coronavirus, and we can also see in events in foreign policy where Bush funded ISIS, the people who would eventually create ISIS, and it's all justified that, oh, this is what the experts tell us to do, and so we're just following what the science says or what the experts say to do.
It's very telling
Yeah.
who they decide as an expert as well. These are very selective, and then they seem to censor and just try to discredit any other expert that says otherwise. It's completely an arbitrary decision on who's the expert you need to be listening to. Whoever will aid the state in granting them more power will be chosen.
Thomas Sowell actually talked about when he was at the Labor Department as an internship doing his graduate studies. He wrote a paper that eventually got seen by Congress, how it was heavily edited and the policy prescription was reversed on its way to Congress from his desk. And that was just because Congress, the Labor Department needed to have certain things to be said in that report that wasn't supported by the evidence.
Oh, man.
They do.
And so that's something to recognize with the technocracy that we keep on seeing, supported by the state, is that the evidence and the conclusion can be edited by higher ups. Like the scientists could be doing everything correctly, but if it's not to the government's liking, they can always edit it tracked it, we tracked certain statements, or they can just find a new scientist who will go along with what they want to do, and that is a giant red pill, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, you can find a scientist to say anything you want. You could a scientist to say there are 12 planets in the solar system. I'm sure you can find a scientist anywhere who will say what you want, and some who will say what you want for the right price, even though they know what they're saying is wrong.
Yep.
So there's no shortage of corruption.
I was actually gonna mention Thomas Sowell before Colton did, because there's a bunch of interviews and stuff you can find of him on YouTube where he talks specifically about this, and he likes to call these intellectuals, and I really like this term, he likes to call them idea workers, because it's exactly what they do. They are, if you're an intellectual, you're not really selling a product or a service that's in any way physical. You're just selling your ideas, and because you think those ideas are going to contribute to society in one way or another. And the reason he talks about intellectuals being so easily corrupted by statism and becoming accomplices to the government is that they need for them to make money, they need to make sure that people think their ideas are valuable. And if the government isn't there to tell people that their ideas are valuable, then they have to do it themselves. And when they have bad ideas, that's not always as easy.
Well, I don't necessarily think it has to do with good or bad ideas. I think it has to deal with persuasion as well as getting government grants.
Yeah, but if you have bad ideas, you might even be able to sell those ideas. But when people realize that they're bad, they're gonna stop caring about you. But when you have the government just chooses whatever ideas it wants. It doesn't care that if those ideas are right, if those ideas are wrong, who created those ideas. It just chooses whatever is more convenient.
Okay, I can see what you're saying now.
I also think that the nature of the corporate press as well, since many CNN, all these people, they're all owned by the same people, and they get corporate subsidies. And obviously, you're not getting corporate subsidies unless you're having some type of symbiotic relationship with the state for some reason. So,
yeah,
I think the biggest red pill that you can give someone who's just a normie is to actually tell them that what they report on the news, the facts that they report, the facts they don't report, the people they have on, are all carefully selected to push a narrative. And every single news outlet has a narrative. I mean, I would even say the Hoppean has a narrative, but we think our narrative is correct. So you just have to keep that in mind when you ingest things. It's a news story. It's not just a news random collection of facts.
Yeah, and I think we can look at. I think we can look at things like Project. Oh, sorry. I think we can look at things like Project Veritas and other, people that have tried to expose the mainstream media, and we can very clearly see that these people do not believe most of the things that they say in the corporate press. They are extremely disingenuous and intentionally trying to mislead people very often.
Yeah, this whole idea that the press isn't partial in any way, shape, or form is such a hollow lie, and it's baffling that some people believe it. No one is impartial. It doesn't matter if you're a person or if you're a company, you're always gonna be run by people who have ideologies, who have convictions. And those convictions are always going to be manifested in whatever it is they're doing. Colton mentioned that we at the Hoppean, we have our agenda, we have our message. And that's true. That's absolutely true. We have our ideas. We think that our ideas are correct, and that's why we are publicizing them. And people should know that. They should know that, but they should also know that about the press. They should know that the press also has an agenda, also has their own ideas, and they think that they're right. And the thing is, the more power like a corporation or an institution has, the more you should be skeptical about it, because more people are going to be reached by those ideas.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, I think it's time to move on to chapter 2 now.
Let's do it.
Yep. So chapter 2 is about broken windows, and let me just read what he actually says on it. Let's say a young hoodlum heaves a brick through a window of a baker's shop. The shopkeeper runs out furious, but the boy is gone. A crowd gathers and begins to stare with quiet satisfaction at the gaping hole in the window and the shadow over the bread and pies. After a while, the crowd feels the need to philosophize, and several of its members are almost certain to remind each other or the baker that after all, misfortune has its bright side. It will make some business for the glazier. As they begin to think of this, they elaborate upon it. How much does a new plate of glass cost? $50? That will be quite a sum. After all, if windows were never broken, what would happen to the glass business? Then, of course, the thing is endless. The glazier will have $50 more to spend on other merchants, and these in turn will have $50 more to spend on still other merchants, and so ad infinitum. The smashed window will go on to providing money and employment in an ever-widening circle. The logical conclusion from all this would be that the little hoodlum who threw the brick, far from being a public menace, was a public benefactor. And this goes into the Bastiats, the seen and the unseen. Because that baker, instead of spending money on the glass, could have been saving up money to spend on a tailor for a suit. And so the glazier is the seen and the tailor is the unseen.
Yeah. What is also misses is that like that broken window and that money spent is like still like wasted resources, because that's gonna be like that broken window is gonna go to the trash, and the glazier is not actually going to have just $50 because him offering his services has a price, and that's just like not considered here.
Yeah, I think he does go into that a little later in the chapter, maybe even a couple paragraphs after that. But yeah, it's not like a free thing. It's not like Glazier is just this infinite well of resources. He had to get his glass and his tools from somewhere, which has a price. And every time he does a job, he has to pay for the resources as well.
Well, this is actually kind of gone into on the philosophizing is the glazier will have $50 to spend on other things. That could be the actual glass for the window, which would then go to the glass manufacturer, who would then buy sand and so on and so forth. It's not so much the fact that there's profits made. It's the fact resources are being diverted from one area to the other. Instead of buying a suit, he's buying a pane of glass, and instead of getting something new and generate, he is simply replacing what has been destroyed.
Yeah,
exactly. It's not wealth generating; it's simply wealth replacing.
Not to mention that the baker didn't choose while he wanted to spend his money. He had to buy the new glass pane and had to have it replaced, because without it he can't keep running his business.
Right. It takes away his ability to really allocate,
to spend his money as he wishes.
Right.
It's no different than the government taking your money and spending it however they want. Except for you're just doing it yourself because you have to.
Totally.
And
I think this is a pretty straightforward chapter, because the glass window is just like the most iconic Keynesian like metaphor, and it's just been dunked over and over. That it's there's not even like fun to be had with it.
Yeah, and it's actually a 2-page chapter, because actually chapter 3 is basically the broken window fallacy on a larger scale. And I think this is actually a good time to go into that. So
Yep.
chapter 3 is called The Blessings of Destruction. And what it is, it's the broken window fallacy on an enormous level. And there is a question that is had when people talk about World War II revitalizing the economy, is how can there be no benefit on a small level when things are destroyed, but there'll be large benefits on a large level when entire cities are destroyed?
That's why they were so like in favor of war, like especially Keynes and stuff,
Yeah,
because they thought that war always stimulates the economy, because war is like all the bakeries have broken windows now.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's very beneficial to arms manufacturers.
Yeah, and actually this moving of demand is actually something that Hazlitt goes over, is that you're shifting demand, but you're not just diverting demand from one area to the other, because not only will demand be diverted during the war to war-making things, after the war, consumer goods, houses that were destroyed need to be rebuilt. That will also be diverted post-war. However, will not merely be diverted, it will be shrunk. And that's because supply and demand are two sides of the same coin. A car salesman, his supply of cars is his demand for all other products.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, if you're gonna have an economy based on war, like just to get the elephant out of the room, you're gonna be constantly at war. You're gonna have people dying. That's already like bad on its own. So just to get like the obvious out of the way, but also, I think it was Hayek who said this. I'm not sure. Okay, don't quote me on this, but I think it was him who said something like this: if you had like universal conscription, you were at war, you had universal conscription, you could like have everyone, like the entire population in the army, everyone would be employed, and you have no unemployment. And then here comes you have nothing to eat, because you need people to do other things, and no one can decide what those other things are but the market. So it doesn't matter that everyone is employed if people aren't employed like the right way.
Right.
Right,
Employment is just a very non-specific measurement.
Yeah, and this is just a socialist calculation problem that Mises goes into in interventionism in his talk on the war socialism.
Yeah.
Right, and Hazlitt also goes into later about diverted resources and employment, such as with the building of the bridge,
Right.
which we'll get into later, of course.
Yeah, no, okay, so just continuing. So supply and demand are two sides of the same coin. The supply of what people make is the demand for other products. And auto economists were not handicapped by the veil that many modern economists were, even in the modern sense that Hazlitt was alive in the 1930s and 1940s, or when Hazlitt was writing this. So this veil is wage payments and indirect forms of payment such as cash, because you're not really, bartering a car for tires or food or anything. You're using cash, and most people are not businessmen. They don't actually own all of the supply. They are wage earners, and so they are paying for things out of their wages. So this is a veil between supply and demand that really, in older economies, was not there.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I'd just like to add on what I said earlier about like the glass pane thing not being not being a choice that the guy has to replace the glass pane, because he actually goes into basically what I said on this paragraph in the chapter here. So I'm just gonna read like this section because I think it's important. So it says that the broken window fallacy, it confuses need with demand. That the more that war destroys, the more it impoverishes, and the greater is going to be the post-war need. But the need is not demand, because those things have to be replaced in order for society, in order for businesses to function. That doesn't mean that like anyone actually wanted them replaced, and that's like the big mistake here.
Yes, and he even goes into, I had this in my notes, anyways. The needs of China are more than the needs of America, but China is not more prosperous than America. And we think about, we're talking about China in the 1930s and 1940s. They were a definite third world economy back then. They didn't have the industrialization that happened since the 90s back then. So
for context, China was like broken up. It wasn't even unified back then. It was just a bunch of like states, a lot of which were just ruled by warlords and had those very like unorganized, primitive, authoritarian governments. And then the unification only came after the war, and they were being like invaded by Japan. So it was just absolute chaos. It's nothing compared to China today.
Yeah, and the unification really happened because of the war. They had to all stand together against the Japanese.
And also because then the Soviet Union would go on to support, of course, the communists.
Yep. Let's see, is there... Yeah, and another fallacy that is made is, especially not necessarily with the economists, but with people thinking about this, is most people think of wealth in terms of how much money they are earning versus how much you can have and how much you can buy.
Yeah.
And so it should be, when we think of the economy and the growth of it, we should really be thinking about how much is made and how many exchanges of real things are being made.
And also if the things that are being made, they like fulfill the demand that the market has. And that's like one huge conversation, because it also goes on to why GDP is such a difficult I guess statistic to judge countries and economies with, because it only analyzes how much is being produced.
And this is why Rothbard actually came up with his own statistic, because unlike what many people talk about consumerism, it's not actually consumption that classical economists or Austrian economists are dealing with. It's production. You have to produce the sandwich in order to eat it.
Right, you have to look at both sides of the coin, what people want and what is being produced. People can want a lot of one thing, but if it's not being produced, or at least not being produced in the amount equal to the demand, then there's a little incongruence there, and then that's where you get into talk about like prices and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay. And he does touch on inflation inflation is not the increase of demand, as it doesn't increase the actual production or exchange of real things. And he says that we're going to have to accept this dogmatically until we actually talk about inflation in its own chapter. And so this is just a sign of things to come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And just to summarize the chapter, post-war demand will shrink because post-war supply will shrink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No
Going
objections here. Pretty basic.
Yeah, going back to that, supply and demand are two sides of the same coin. They're really all two sides of the same coin, because it's not just demand is not just what people consume, because you actually have to have a supply in order to obviously you actually have to. Anyways, we already talked about that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about public work means. This basically gets summarized into everything must be paid for.
Yeah.
Whether
Definitely.
we pay for it immediately using taxes, or we pay using debt, it will be paid for. It's either going to be paid for immediately through taxes, or in the course of several years, through
True
debt.
that. Yeah.
There's an interesting thing that actually Krugman talked about, I think, 2 days ago. Saying we owe it to ourselves, and this is going to be explored later in the book, but it's a interesting thing that Hazlitt points out in this chapter, because many people say, "Oh, it doesn't matter. We don't have to pay for taxes. We can create something out of nothing. We owe debt to ourselves, and so it's no big deal. We'll just create something using, like I said, create something out of nothing." And it's an economic fallacy that is kind of silly, but the actual argumentation is covered later in the book.
Yeah.
Right. It is a misallocation. It provides employment for some people, but this is not. These taxes aren't going to people's direct needs and what they in their local communities need or want.
Yeah, and actually, Hazlitt talks about the distinction between necessary government spending and unnecessary government spending. And this raises a question that I don't think we'll get to in now or in this book, but how do we make the distinction between necessary and unnecessary?
I mean, I don't
It's a
think there
good
is.
question.
I mean, Hazlitt doesn't address it in the book, but it's kind of just a question that I think we'll get into it maybe in a different book. How do we determine what is necessary and unnecessary?
Right, and I think that really might just be what's more necessary and what is less necessary, kind of on a spectrum rather than a binary choice between being necessary and not necessary. And so you could say that perhaps these public works are providing things that are either very, very low on the necessary scale or fall at the very, very bottom.
Oh, yeah, and this comes from method of value that Austrian economics comes into. That when you're talking about breaking the window, the baker is going to spend his money from a more something he values higher to something he values lower, because obviously he did not value replacing the stick in the glass anyways, otherwise, unless he was planning to for whatever reason.
But then he would have done so voluntarily.
Right. But what I'm talking about is because it's involuntary, it's actually breaking up the ordinal.
Yeah, I was just agreeing.
Right.
Yeah.
It distorts his priorities. And the thing about these public works projects is now you have to talk about ordinal preferences, aggregate ordinal preferences, which is essentially infinitely difficult to do.
Yeah. And this is actually the ordinal versus cardinal method of preferences is actually a big difference between Austrian and neoclassical and other schools. Ordinal is just a list of things. I would prefer to do this, then this, then this, then this. And the cardinal is how much more do I prefer to do this than the other thing.
Right. They try to actually measure almost like the distance between two items on that list.
Meanwhile, Austrian economics is more just focused on not necessarily the measurement of things, but the
Right.
Because I mean, if you stop to think about the distance, quote unquote distance, doesn't nearly as much. Or if you can only afford to do one or other, you're gonna have to choose one or the other. By how much you choose one is the other. When it comes to most economic decisions, that kind of measurement isn't really important.
Yeah. I can't see any reason to disagree.
One thing that I would like to say about the public works, and that's something that I go on detail in that article that I'm probably never going to finish, but I digress. One thing that I would like to mention is that it kind of creates an artificial demand cycle, and it's like a vicious cycle. Because let's just say, like, so you have the government, and the government orders the construction of, I don't know, public roads, like the Autobahn or something like that. So you're gonna have an artificial, because it's almost spontaneous creation of demand for a certain amount of services, certain amount of products, etc. And things are going to be paid for by taxes, are going to be employed because of it. People are going to be getting paid. Perfect. Where's the problem? The problem is that artificial demand that was created, if it simply stops existing because the government either doesn't have any more money or because, I don't know, they decided to stop, all that, like those things that were taking place because of that artificial demand are going to crumble because it just disappeared. So all those new people that were hired are going to lose their jobs. All those new companies that were established to help provide those materials, they're all going to go bankrupt because the demand is going to be artificially, it's going to shrink back to what it was before it was artificially increased. That's a big problem because then there's going to be a necessity for the government to keep up that demand. And that's going to require ever-increasing taxes or ever-increasing debt. And that's exactly what we see in the United States. Like right after the war, that just starts growing and growing and growing, never stop. I think Colton died.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Colton.
Oh, he's back.
Yep.
Save your Fs.
Yep.
He lose.
Yeah, too good for him.
Yeah, no, I was trying to post the link somewhere, and I accidentally clicked on a voice chat instead of a normal chat.
Oh.
Yeah, that's
Anyways, so the arguments put forth in this chapter actually turns politicians into asking because arguments are talking about how wonderful it is to build. And so if you think it's wonderful when a government builds a bridge, obviously you're going to try to find all of the cases where the government can build a bridge instead of where it must build a bridge.
Right, you're going to look to see how you can allocate towards building bridges rather than like for when other situations where they might be needed, including situations that might not even be pretty, other products that need to be produced, or other projects.
Yeah, and depending on like how and where those things are built or how those things are allocated, they might actually be that economy into something beneficial. Like, just to give it like a very extreme like example, like very hyperbolic, if you just built a bridge like
To
in
nowhere.
the middle of nowhere, it would not only not be beneficial, but it could be detrimental, because it would prevent other things from being built in that area.
Yep. And so, just to come to the first argument, the first argument is building the bridge will make jobs. This is the scene. So when you're building a bridge, it might create 500 jobs for 1 year. But the issue with this is this is not taking into account what would have been created in the marketplace if the market was not taxed
Yeah.
to build this bridge.
And also what I said, that those jobs are going to disappear if
Yeah, it's just a temporary.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like when if this could, yeah, it's temporary for any investment that was the marketplace that could be permanent jobs that are done away with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right,
even
this also
if you
stops-
consider,
This
sorry,
also
even,
stops the. Oh, sorry. You go ahead. You go ahead.
okay, even if you consider like a perfect world in which there is no lobbying, no corruption, no like public scandals and things like that money going in the form of taxes going